After the pilots fainted during the flight, a 12-year-old boy takes control of the plane. What he did while flying left everyone crying. The sun was already peeking over the horizon when 12-year-old Leonard Thompson walked through the automatic airport doors, his eyes shining with excitement. He carried a small backpack adorned with carefully placed airplane stickers and his trusty aviation manual. His mother, Rachel, walked beside him, pushing a black suitcase, her tired yet proud smile lighting up her face. This trip wasn't just a gift. It was the culmination of months of hard work, extra hours, and savings. At the boarding gate, Leonard could barely contain his enthusiasm. He pointed at the planes parked on the tarmac, identifying models and airlines with remarkable precision. "Look, Mom, a Boeing, and over there, an Airbus A320. Rachel didn't know much about aviation, but her son's excitement was infectious. "You really know everything about planes, Leo. You're definitely going to be a pilot someday, huh?" Soon, the magical moment arrived. Boarding. Leonard took a deep breath as he stepped onto the plane's narrow aisle. His eyes scanned every detail, the seat upholstery, the overhead bins, the ceiling lights. He even tried to sneak a glance into the cockpit as they passed by. Once they settled into their seats, Leonard pressed his face to the window, watching the runway and the mechanics at work. "Mom, did you know a Boeing 737 like this one can reach speeds of up to 560 miles per hour? That's amazing, sweetheart," Rachel replied as she adjusted her seatbelt. "Who knows? Maybe you'll be flying one of these someday." As the plane taxied, Leonard felt a rush of adrenaline, the growing roar of the engines, the vibration of the floor, and finally, the powerful thrust of takeoff. He was pushed back into his seat as the plane lifted off the ground, and the world outside transformed into a sea of clouds. Once the flight stabilized, a flight attendant walked down the aisle. Leonard, shy as ever, hesitated, but then decided to speak. "Excuse me, what's our altitude right now?" The flight attendant smiled, pleasantly surprised. "We're at 33,000 feet. Are you interested in aviation?" Leonard nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I spend hours on the flight simulator. I even know how autopilot works and how to read basic instruments." Rachel chuckled softly, impressed by her son's boldness. The flight attendant was visibly intrigued. "You sound like a real expert. Keep it up and maybe we'll work together one day." She walked away, but not before handing him a small sticker with the airline's logo, which Leonard tucked away like a trophy. The flight continued smoothly, with Leonard soaking in every moment. He cherished everything, even the simple onboard meal, and mentally noted every detail: the safety instructions, the illuminated signs, and the crew's announcements. This wasn't just a flight. It was a dream in motion. But as the plane flew over the Caribbean Sea, the first jolt was felt, a slight shake, like a small bump. Leonard noticed the sudden hush that fell over the cabin. Passengers exchanged wary glances, but the calm voice of the captain soon came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some mild turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. Everything is under control." Leonard tightened his seatbelt, trying not to show concern, but his eyes were fixed on the plane's wing, which swayed gently. He knew turbulence was normal, but something felt different. Sensing her son's unease, Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his. "It's okay, Leo. The pilot knows what he's doing." Leonard nodded but didn't take his eyes off the window. The plane jolted again, harder this time, and he noticed the seatbelt sign glowing above. The flight attendant returned to the aisle, checking that everyone was buckled in. The shaking grew more intense, and now even Leonard felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew more than he probably should about what this could mean. Then came the strongest jolt yet, followed by a metallic sound reverberating through the fuselage. The murmurs of concern among passengers turned into gasps of fear. Leonard glanced at Rachel, who tried to mask her worry with a calming smile, but he could tell something was wrong. very wrong. As the plane subtly began losing altitude, Leonard closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to face the greatest adventure of his life. The plane shook violently like a leaf caught in a storm. The jolts had escalated into sudden drops, causing screams and murmurs of panic among the passengers. Leonard gripped the armrests tightly while Rachel, beside him, clutched his hand firmly, trying to convey a calmness she didn't truly feel. The captain's voice echoed through the speakers again, this time with a tenser tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are encountering severe turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened and remain seated." Leonard noticed something unusual. Despite the pilot's announcement, the silence from the cockpit felt odd. He knew from his aviation studies that during emergencies, pilots usually maintained constant communication with the crew or passengers, but here there was an unsettling void after the brief announcement. He turned to Rachel, hesitating. "Mom, something's wrong. They should be talking more, explaining what's happening." Rachel looked at him, surprised by his observation. Before she could respond, the plane lurched sharply to one side, eliciting louder screams from the passengers. The oxygen masks dropped automatically, dangling like eerie specters above everyone's heads. Leonard and Rachel hurriedly put on their masks, but the boy was increasingly convinced that something abnormal was happening. In the aisle, the flight attendant struggled to maintain order. She moved between the rows, trying to reassure passengers, but her nervous eyes betrayed her words. Leonard mustered his courage. Despite the lump in his throat and his usual shyness, he called out to the flight attendant as she passed by. "Ma'am, please, what's happening in the cockpit? I think something's wrong." The woman stopped, frowning. "Everything is under control, sir," she began, but Leonard interrupted her. "It's not. If it were, the pilot would be speaking to us more. I read about this in the safety manual. Something's wrong, I'm sure of it." The flight attendant hesitated. She glanced toward the cockpit, visibly distressed, but tried to maintain her composure. "We can't open the cabin door without authorization." Leonard looked directly into her eyes, his expression serious. "If they're unconscious, no one is flying the plane. We need to check. Please, let me help." Rachel tried to intervene, alarmed. "Leonard, this isn't your responsibility. You're just a kid." Before the conversation could continue, another violent jolt caused the plane to drop abruptly. Cups and trays scattered across the floor, and some passengers screamed in fear. Shrill alarms began blaring from the cockpit. That was enough to convince the flight attendant. She rushed to the cockpit door and entered the emergency code on the nearby panel. The door slid open slowly, revealing a scene that froze Leonard in place. Both pilots were slumped over the controls, unconscious, their oxygen masks displaced. Lights flashed everywhere, and the alarms blared warnings of imminent danger. The aircraft was clearly out of control, in a perilous, descending tilt. The flight attendant clasped her hand over her mouth, horrified. "Oh my God, they're not okay," she murmured, almost inaudibly. Leonard took a step forward, despite Rachel trying to hold him back. "I knew it! The alarms! The autopilot isn't set! We're losing altitude fast!" The flight attendant's gaze shifted between Leonard and the unconscious pilots, paralyzed with indecision. She pressed an emergency button to notify ground control of the issue, but the response was delayed due to interference from the stormy weather. Each passing second brought the plane closer to danger. "We don't have time to wait for help," Leonard insisted. "I know how to work the basic controls. Please let me try to stabilize the plane." The flight attendant hesitated, looking at the slender boy with a mix of doubt and desperation. You really know what you're doing?" Leonard took a deep breath, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "I'm not a pilot, but I know how to read the instruments and adjust the autopilot. It's our only chance until air traffic control can guide us." She nodded slowly, still dazed by the situation. "Okay, let's try. But I'll be here with you the whole time." Rachel, though terrified, realized her son was right. Her eyes filled with tears as she watched him walk toward the cockpit, leaving behind the shy boy she knew, and revealing someone ready to face a monumental challenge. Leonard entered the cockpit, his hands trembling. The control panel was lit up with flashing red and yellow warnings, and the sound of the alarms was deafening. He sat in the co-pilot's seat, swallowed hard, and began scanning the instruments. The plane was in a steep descent, and the systems were overwhelmed. With the flight attendant's help, he activated the radio and managed to establish initial contact with air traffic control. A calm, deep voice came through the static. "This is Miami Air Traffic Control. Identify yourself and state your situation." Leonard gripped the microphone with sweaty hands and responded, his voice shaky. I'm Leonard Thompson, a passenger. Both pilots are unconscious. I'm in the cockpit, and the plane is descending rapidly. I need help." There was a brief pause before the voice responded. "Understood, Leonard. We're here to assist you. Stay calm and follow our instructions. You can do this." Leonard took a deep breath. He had no other choice. Now he was the one in control. The cockpit of the plane resembled a scene of utter chaos. The control panel was a mosaic of warning lights, each demanding immediate attention. Alarms blared incessantly, like a clock ticking down to disaster. The constant shaking of the aircraft made every movement a struggle. Leonard adjusted himself in the co-pilot's seat, feeling the crushing weight of an unimaginable responsibility. He knew that despite his hours on simulators and reading manuals, this was entirely different. Lives depended on his actions. The calm, precise voice of the Miami air traffic controller came through the radio again. "Leonard, we're here to help. First, I need to know, is the autopilot engaged?" Leonard scanned the panel, locating the autopilot indicators. The blinking light confirmed the worst. The system had been disengaged. "It's not on. The plane is descending manually, and we're losing altitude fast," he replied, trying to suppress the panic in his voice. "Understood. First step, stabilize the descent. Look at the control yoke in front of you. Gently pull it back while keeping your eyes on the artificial horizon. Don't move it too quickly, or the plane could stall." Leonard nodded to himself, gripping the yoke with trembling hands. He took a deep breath and pulled back slightly, feeling the resistance of the massive aircraft. The plane responded, but the movement triggered an even more intense jolt, making Leonard's heart race. "It's really heavy," he exclaimed. "That's normal. Keep steady, Leonard. You're doing great," the controller reassured him. Gradually, the plane began to level out. The artificial horizon on the panel adjusted, showing that the aircraft was pulling out of its dangerous descent. Leonard felt a small wave of relief, but he knew this was only the first step. Behind him, the flight attendant clung to the back of a seat for support as the plane continued to tremble. She picked up the intercom and addressed the passengers, her voice composed despite the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats and follow all safety instructions. The situation is under control, and we are working to stabilize the flight." Although the cabin was filled with tension, her words brought a sliver of comfort. Leonard glanced briefly over his shoulder and caught his mother's gaze. She attempted a reassuring smile, though her tear-filled eyes betrayed her worry. Turning back to the panel, Leonard refocused on the task at hand. The controller's voice came through the radio again. "Now that we've stabilized, we need to adjust your altitude and speed. Leonard, check the airspeed indicator. Is your speed within the safe range?" Leonard located the airspeed indicator. The needle was dangerously close to the red zone. "It's too high. How do I reduce it?" "Move the throttle levers to your right. Slowly pull them back to decrease engine power. Make smooth, gradual adjustments." Leonard reached for the throttles, carefully pulling them back. The vibration of the plane eased slightly as the speed began to drop. A brief smile crossed his face, a flicker of hope as progress was made. Then a new alarm sounded. A flashing red light on the panel indicated a pressurization issue. "Leonard, we're getting a pressurization alert. Can you confirm if the automatic pressurization system is active? Leonard searched for the indicated switch. It was off. He quickly activated it, but Miami's voice cut in again. Good, but we need to ensure the oxygen masks are functioning properly. Ask the flight attendant to check on the passengers. The flight attendant nodded and hurried off, leaving Leonard to continue adjusting the plane. Sweat dripped down his face as the controller's voice remained steady in his ear. Leonard, you're doing an excellent job. Now let's engage the autopilot to keep the plane stable while we prepare for the approach. Following the detailed instructions, Leonard managed to re-engage the autopilot. For the first time since the ordeal began, the aircraft flew steadily. The boy finally had a few seconds to breathe. He glanced around the cockpit, fully absorbing the gravity of the situation. He picked up the radio again, his voice trembling. Miami Control, what's next? Now, Leonard, we need to guide the plane onto an approach path. We're coordinating with Miami International Airport to give you priority landing clearance. I'll guide you step by step, but you need to stay calm. Are you ready? Leonard gripped the radio tightly, his voice filled with determination. Yes, I'm ready. The controller continued. Adjust the course. Look at the navigation panel and use the heading knob to set the plane to a heading of 270. That will take you toward Miami. Leonard turned the knob, watching as the plane adjusted to the new heading. The clouds below began to thin, revealing the ocean far below, a chilling reminder of their distance from safety. Meanwhile, the flight attendant returned to the cockpit, reporting that all passengers were safe with their oxygen masks. Leonard gave her a quick glance, knowing she was relying on him. Despite the immense weight of responsibility, he couldn't let anyone down. With the plane stabilized and on course, Leonard pressed the radio button again. We're ready for the next step. What do I do now? From the other side, the controller's calm voice came through. Now comes the most critical part, Leonard. The landing, and you can do it. We're with you. Leonard nodded, even though no one could see him. He knew the hardest challenge lay ahead, but for the first time he felt that maybe, just maybe, he could save everyone on board. Leonard stared at the panel in front of him, his eyes sharp and his heart racing. The aircraft, stable for now, felt like a sleeping giant ready to rebel again. Lights flashed in various parts of the cockpit, each signaling something urgent. He knew there was no time to relax. Holding the radio firmly, he listened intently to the calm, steady instructions from the Miami air traffic controller. Leonard, we need to do a quick checklist before initiating the approach. Tell me, are the flaps set for the initial descent? Leonard searched for the flap controls and checked their position. No, they're still retracted, adjusting now. As he moved the controls, a new red light lit up on the panel, accompanied by a shrill alarm. Leonard felt his stomach sink. He turned to the flight attendant behind him and said, trying to stay calm, "New alarm. Miami Control, something's wrong. It looks like a hydraulic system failure." The response came almost immediately, tinged with concern. Leonard, the hydraulic system controls several critical functions of the aircraft, including the flaps and landing gear. Check the secondary panel to see if the primary system is still operational. Leonard scanned the secondary panel, his breathing quick but focused. Finally, he found the hydraulic system indicator. Control. The primary system is losing pressure. It's almost inoperative. The controller's tone grew more serious. Understood. We'll need to activate the manual backup system. It's not ideal, but it'll give us enough control to proceed. I'll guide you through it. Are you ready? Leonard gave a quick yes and adjusted the controls as directed. He understood that this bought them some time, but the situation remained dire. Without the primary hydraulic system, the landing gear might fail to deploy. He recalled from the simulators he'd used how critical such failures could be. "Control, what about the landing gear? It's hydraulic too, isn't it?" he asked, his voice unsteady. There was a pause before the controller replied. "Yes, Leonard. It's possible the landing gear won't deploy automatically. If that happens, we'll use the manual override. For now, focus on what's in front of you. We'll handle one step at a time." The flight attendant, sensing the boy's tension, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Leonard, you're doing an incredible job. Everyone is counting on you, but don't worry. You've got this." He nodded, though doubts clawed at his mind. He was just a 12-year-old boy. Even with his theoretical knowledge, that didn't mean he could save a real airplane. "What if I mess up?" he thought. "What if they all die because of me?" As if reading his thoughts, the controller's voice came back, firm and steady. "Leonard, listen to me. This is hard, I know. But every action you've taken so far has kept this plane in the air. You can do this. Just follow my instructions, one step at a time." Leonard took a deep breath. The plane seemed to respond better after the hydraulic adjustments, but the looming issue of the landing gear hung over him like a shadow. He forced himself to focus on what he could control. "Control, course adjustment complete. We're aligned for the initial approach," he reported after checking the instruments. The controller's calm voice returned. "Excellent work, Leonard. Now we'll start slowing down. Can you deploy the spoiler to assist?" Leonard located the spoiler controls and activated them. However, another alert appeared on the panel. He read it aloud. "Partial spoiler failure. It's only working on one side." The controller responded quickly. "That's okay. It will cause some instability, but we can compensate. Adjust the yoke gently to keep the balance." Leonard followed the instructions, feeling the plane shudder more intensely. He gripped the yoke tightly, carefully controlling the pitch and roll until the aircraft steadied again. Then, the flight attendant, holding a portable radio, received a report from the technical compartment. She turned to Leonard, her face pale. "Leonard, they're telling me the landing gear isn't responding to the automatic command. It won't deploy." This was the moment Leonard had feared. Without the landing gear, landing safely would be nearly impossible. He grabbed the radio with trembling hands and explained the situation to Miami Control. There was a brief pause before the controller replied. "Leonard, we'll need to use the manual emergency system to lower the landing gear. The control is located to your left, below the panel. You'll have to crank the lever multiple times to force it down. It's a physical effort, but it will work. Can you do it?" Leonard located the lever and began turning it with all his strength. The gears groaned, and sweat poured down his face as he repeated the motion. His arms began to ache, but he couldn't stop. The flight attendant joined him, holding the lever alongside him. After what felt like an eternity, a metallic click echoed through the cabin. On the panel, a green light lit up. The landing gear was down. Leonard released the lever, gasping for breath. "Control, landing gear deployed. Green light confirmed." The response came, filled with relief. "Outstanding work, Leonard. Now let's focus on the landing. You've come this far. You're almost there." Leonard closed his eyes for a brief moment, took a deep breath, and prepared himself. He knew the greatest challenge still lay ahead, bringing this massive aircraft safely to the ground. The tension in the cockpit was palpable. Leonard sat in the co-pilot's seat, his hands gripping the yoke tightly, eyes locked on the instrument panel. Outside, the once blue sky was now shrouded in dense clouds, rendering visibility near zero. The radio buzzed with the calm yet urgent voice of the Miami air traffic controller. "Leonard, you're approximately 5 minutes from the runway. The weather isn't favorable, but the airport's approach systems will guide you to align the plane. We'll do this together." Leonard nodded, adjusting the controls as he had learned in simulators. His palms were sweaty, but he couldn't let them slip. He knew that every pair of eyes on the plane was figuratively fixed on him, even if he couldn't see them. The flight attendant returned to the cockpit with a serious but determined expression. "Leonard, the passengers are silent. Many are praying. They believe in you." Leonard swallowed hard. "They believe in me," he thought, feeling the immense weight of responsibility. He turned back to the radio. Control, I can't see the runway. The navigation system is guiding me, but the wind is strong. The plane is shaking a lot. Understood, Leonard. We're fine-tuning the approach signals to ensure you can align with the runway. Remember, trust your instruments. Don't try to look outside. Focus on the panels and follow our commands. The plane suddenly jolted violently as a gust of wind struck. Leonard tightened his grip on the yoke, fighting to keep control. The artificial horizon wavered, and he poured all his focus into stabilizing the aircraft. Control, the wind is pulling us left. What do I do? He asked, his breath labored. Correct gently with the yoke. Use the rudder pedals to maintain balance. Don't overcompensate. Do it slowly. Leonard followed the instructions, carefully adjusting the plane's course. He knew the runway was ahead, even though it remained hidden in the thick clouds. The radio continued to buzz with detailed guidance. Leonard, you're almost there. The runway will appear in just a few seconds. Reduce your speed to 155 knots. Set the flaps to 30 degrees for additional lift. He did as instructed, pulling back the throttle and adjusting the flaps. A new warning light flashed on the panel, but Leonard ignored it, focusing solely on the essential tasks. Suddenly the clouds began to part, revealing the glowing outline of the runway lights. Leonard's heart raced. The runway was closer than he expected. "Control, I see the runway," he announced, his voice a mixture of relief and panic. "Excellent, Leonard. Now focus on alignment. Keep the nose of the plane slightly elevated. You need to decelerate progressively as you near the ground. Remember, touch down with the main landing gear first." The plane hurtled toward the runway. The lights shimmered like a beacon, but the crosswind made the approach treacherous. Leonard gripped the yoke with all his strength, constantly correcting the course as the controller guided him. "Leonard, you're well aligned. Now reduce your speed to 125 knots. Prepare for touchdown." The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Leonard felt the plane descending, and every fiber of his being urged him to stay calm. He adjusted the yoke, keeping the nose elevated as instructed. Then it happened. The main landing gear struck the runway with a jarring thud, sending a violent shudder through the plane. For a moment, Leonard thought he'd made a mistake, but the radio reassured him almost instantly. "Fantastic, Leonard! Now decelerate. Use the thrust reversers to slow the plane. You're doing great." Leonard pulled the thrust levers, activating the reversers. The deafening roar of the engine slowing filled the cabin. The aircraft raced down the runway but steadily lost speed. Finally, the plane came to a halt at the end of the runway. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then, cheers and applause erupted from the passenger cabin. Tears of relief streamed down the faces of crew and passengers alike. Leonard released the yoke, panting, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The flight attendant placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Leonard. You saved everyone." The radio came to life again with the voice of the controller. "Leonard, the entire airport is on its feet. You're a hero." Leonard didn't respond immediately. He looked out at the runway ahead, now still and peaceful. His mind was still processing what had just happened. He was just a 12-year-old boy, but at that moment he had achieved the impossible. The plane was stationary on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles with flashing lights. The doors had opened, and a line of firefighters and paramedics were assisting passengers down the stairs. Outside, the sound of applause from airport staff and rescue teams filled the air. Despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, Leonard remained seated in the cockpit, staring at the plane's controls, as if he still needed to guide it. The flight attendant knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Leonard, it's over. Everything is okay now. You were incredible." He looked at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, and finally released the yoke, realizing his fingers were numb from gripping it so tightly. I didn't want anything bad to happen to my mom or to anyone." Outside, Rachel was among the first passengers to disembark. When she saw Leonard, She ran to embrace him as he stepped out of the cockpit. Wrapping him in her arms, she sobbed with relief. "My son, my hero, I was so scared, but I knew you could do it. You're so brave." Leonard didn't know how to respond. He hugged his mother back, but inside it still felt like he was trapped in a strange dream or a surreal nightmare. What he had done seemed unimaginable. As mother and son descended the stairs, the applause grew louder. Firefighters, paramedics, pilots, and even passengers from other flights had gathered to honor the boy who had saved the plane. Leonard immediately blushed. He had never liked being the center of attention. All he wanted now was to disappear into the background, but that seemed impossible. Among the crowd, reporters began to push forward. Microphones and cameras were pointed at him, and questions poured in. How did you manage to fly the plane? What went through your mind during the landing? Do you dream of becoming a pilot? Leonard turned to Rachel, overwhelmed and confused. Sensing her son's discomfort, she stepped in. "Please, he's just a child. Today, all we want is to rest and be thankful we're alive." The crowd respected her words, parting to make way for them. Leonard spotted the air traffic controller, who had guided him through the ordeal, now standing with the paramedics. The man, a grey-haired veteran, greeted him with a warm smile. "You did an incredible job, kid. I'm certain even some experienced pilots wouldn't have handled it as well as you did." Leonard shook his head modestly. "I just did what I had to do. I'm not a real pilot. I just know a bit about planes because I like studying them." The controller patted him on the shoulder. "That's more than enough, Leonard. You saved many lives today. Never doubt that." In the days that followed, the story spread worldwide. Newspapers, TV channels, and social media were flooded with headlines about the kid pilot. Leonard became an overnight sensation, but he avoided the spotlight. When reporters tried to contact him, he politely declined, choosing instead to spend time with his mother and return to his simple routine. The airline, immensely grateful, offered lifetime free flights for both Leonard and Rachel. During a special ceremony in his honor, they presented him with a miniature replica of the plane he had landed, engraved with a heartfelt dedication. "To our young hero, who proved that the impossible can be achieved." Leonard accepted the gift with a shy smile, but what mattered most to him wasn't the recognition. It was the realization that the experience, terrifying as it had been, solidified what he had always known. He wanted to be a pilot. As the days passed, he doubled down on his studies. He spent hours on simulators, devoured aviation manuals, and eagerly asked questions to pilots who came to meet the prodigy. What had once been a passion had transformed into a calling. One night, as he gazed at the starry sky through his bedroom window, Leonard spoke softly, almost to himself. "One day I'll fly a real plane, and this time it won't be an emergency. It'll be my job, my life." Rachel, standing in the doorway, overheard her son's words. She smiled and sat beside him. "You've already proven you're capable, Leonard. What happened was just the beginning." He smiled back, feeling more confident than ever. Deep down, he knew the true landing was yet to come, the day he would take off as a pilot and fulfill the dream that had saved so many lives. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.